Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Fuse Logic Podcast. This is episode 2 of season 2 in 2017. Ready for countdown? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Liftoff.
Welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Fuse Logic Podcast. This morning it's my great pleasure to be speaking with someone who I've known for a number of years and have really admired his work. Is this the end of business as we know it? What is the future of business? Well, if you want to know, then keep listening. Gracing your digital airwaves today is a wicked digital analyst, world-renowned speaker, and prolific author. I've also heard people call him Mr. X. Welcome to the Fuse Logic Podcast, Brian Solis.
Mr. X. I love that. I've also heard Professor X. I've heard and to have any sort of persona tied to business books and the future of technology is kind of cool in my book.
Yeah, I have to agree. Of course, I was referencing there X, The Experience Where Business Meets Design, your most recent book. It's interesting because it just seems like every time you and I circle back from time to time, whether it's at South by Southwest, which was the last place where you and I met and chatted briefly, and that was actually when I got my signed copy of your last book, Engaged, or one of your previous books. Sorry, there's so many, Brian. I'm trying to keep up. We had a lot of chat about strategy and about marketing and all these kinds of things that you tend to touch on as you go through your business. So I wanted to talk to you today, and again, thank you for being on the show. I want to know a lot about not only the book and the subject matter there, but also about you, the serial entrepreneur, the analyst, and the speaker, the author. So let's talk a little bit about what got you interested in basically taking your business, and there's lots of facets to it, but taking your business in this direction where you are today. What was, like, say, a defining moment that kicked you in this direction?
I have, I'll just give you the human being answer, and then you could get more targeted with your questions for the business world. But on the human being question, there were natural entrepreneurial inclinations even since when I was a young boy. I started my first company, which was a media company, at the age of 20, and started my next company after that at the age of 29, but all the while having to take full-time jobs and attending university because that's what I was supposed to do. I came from a very traditional family. You follow the rules, you go to school, you all of just the things that you learn in life of which to sort of follow that path. And I would always get these bugs in my ear to just try. Why do we have to do it this way? Why couldn't we try it this way? What if we explored another avenue in order to get to where we're trying to go? And the whole time I was asking those questions, I was constantly being told to stop asking questions and just go do what you're supposed to do. Why is it so difficult, Brian? Why can't you follow the rules? And so I got labeled, even as a young kid, up until as a young adult, as being a troublemaker or being someone that you can't follow the rules, and that gets me ostracized from a lot of growth opportunities, or puts me in political hot water within organizations, and I just realized that just wasn't going to be for me. I needed to try and do things my way, not just because I was trying to be a troublemaker, but simply because you could see that there was a different way to do it, maybe a better way to do it. And that drive, that what some people now call that hustle, but the desire to do something differently or greater than what's done today, that's sort of what's been behind all of my businesses. And the other human being answer is none of this was by design. It's not like I set out to be who I am today. That's just sort of a very strange and wonderful byproduct of just setting out and trying to do the right thing, or to do what I felt was going to be better for not just me, but for everybody. And counterintuitively, I gave away a lot of the things I was learning along the way, just publishing it, sharing it, just relentless with what I was learning, because I felt that there was something bigger than just me trying to do it. I felt that if more of us could do this, we could create a community of change, and that's what drove me. And the result of that was books and speeches and engagements that I just didn't plan for, and am happily surprised and just humbled by it all.
So, I think that creating a community of change is what I really picked up there. And so people know automatically when they start reading your books, listening to your interviews, whether you're giving them or being the interviewer, people are expecting now, I think, from you that aura of change. They know, I think, that when they call you up and say, "Hey, Brian, geez, we're a Fortune 50, Fortune 500, whatever it is, we need a little help," what they're looking for is that sort of change, injection of innovation and fresh thinking. Is that fair to say?
I think they're looking for, there's a lot of psychology I've learned in all of this, because really what we're talking about is, whether it's technology, innovation, disruption, what we're talking about is change. And what I've learned more and more as I go is that change is something that starts from within, right? So no matter what change you're going to lead within the organization or for your own company or your business, that you have to first believe that you need to change. And that's the hardest part. So when I get inquiries, it's mostly about personal validation first. Like, I am not crazy, right? For thinking that these are things I need to do or want to do. And trying to talk them into a position of like, yes, you're not crazy. You are right on the money. And then from there, what do we need to do to move forward? And that, it's not unlike the whole thing I went through. I needed validation and understanding from the community that I was building that, hey, I'm not crazy either. So it's a really interesting place to start. But once you start there, then you start to go through the elements of which you can actually bring about change or innovate.
Is there any more intense sort of feeling like that, where you need the validation when you're writing a book? And of course, I'm I really do respect anybody who can publish one, let alone as many as you have, and have them be well received. But what you really are putting that idea or series of ideas out there in print and digital and hard copy, and so is there that kind of element there where you hope, like, man, I don't know, I really hope people get what I'm trying to say here. Do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I'd be lying if I said no. I tend to care maybe too much, whereas other people who are very successful go out and basically say, "F that! I just know what I'm trying to do, and if you want to support me, great. If you don't, then great." But there's an element, though, of being so passionate about what you feel needs to happen that you tend to take 1,000 different ways to validate that in your own work, which makes it that much more complicated to actually put that into a book or into a speech or into a product. So it's almost like the equivalent of mental A/B testing across a variety of fronts before you understand that. Even then, you're not 100% sure you're on the path, right? So when I was writing the latest book, X, the part of it was to build an experience that was going to be an experience, which was the whole point of the book. And the other part was, how do I make something tangible, like with an elusive word and an elusive thing like experience itself. So even up until the book published, I wasn't 100% sure that people were going to get it. And I'll give you an example. A very, very well-known, just a master of innovation and technology and business transformation. He's just synonymous with it. We were in France and sitting out having a glass of wine, and he asked me to tell him about what the book was all about. And I explained it to him to the best of my capability. And he sort of laughed and said, Well, that sounds great. What's your next book going to be about? And that was his way of just sort of saying it might be too complicated of a subject to sort of be in a book and to be considered as a mainstream product.
I will say this about all of your books, and I'm not through all the way through X. Just to full disclosure, I'm just getting started. But what I will say is that you don't write fluff. You don't present. You present a lot of critical thinking. You touch on things that I think a lot of business owners are struggling with. I mean, this most recent one and describing customer experience, employee experience, I think is incredibly important. And I think that too often people will get stuck in ruts of process, and this is the way we've done it. It's dialed in. We can make money doing it, so let's just stick with it. And they don't really take time, I think, as much as they should to really analyze what the experience is like when people go to engage with their company. And I think that's where correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what you're trying to key in on with this latest book and what you're talking about now.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for that. I mean, I think critical thinking, look, it's taken me, maybe 3 times as many books to achieve any sort of status or stature in the community than it has with other people who do write fluff and platitudes and things that are more intended to just sort of inspire people to just wake up the next day and feel charged, and they all have their purpose. But when you try to make any approach to critical thinking and change, which are both hard in of themselves, to inspire someone, that's when it takes on its greatest meaning for me, because it's not just connecting with the reader, it's actually connecting inside of someone else to build that community it was talking about. And that takes a long time, and it's difficult, and in many ways it's thankless, and also in many ways it's lonely, because I'm always in the cave researching, writing, trying to make sense of all of these trends, and then to bring it back to someone to say, look, here's what I found. I found that your customer is not the customer you used to know. And even though you're still making money today, Blockbuster Video made money all the way up until it didn't. And every other company that has gone out of business has made money up until it couldn't afford to sustain being in business anymore. And it's just a matter of time before your customer shifts, just like it did with Kodak. There's always this shift where there's momentum of the new customer coming up. And if you're not in front of that, then you're going to be behind it. And I always try to find ways to convince people to see that you have to double down. You still have to support the customer as it exists today, but you have to build out the experiences for your customer that's starting to learn and taste and experience what it's like to have better transactions, better companies, better services, better products. In many ways, I say that any company that deals in an online world is competing with Uber, simply because Uber is taking out all of the friction from traditional services and wrapping them together in a new product that becomes the standard for experience. Why isn't my doctor like that? Why isn't my insurance agent like that? Why isn't anything like that? And so their expectations, their behaviors, their preferences, their values, these are things that we can plug into to understand how to change the experience, how to change how we do business to start to compete for the future right now.
I know that your colleague Jeremiah Ouyang, and he and I have chatted over the years as well, is talking a lot about the automated economy, and self-driving cars and all sorts of stuff that we could go into on the tech side. But when we talk about customer experience, how do you think things like integrating bots? I mean, most recently, the AI is really at the forefront. Bots are being adopted, and I'm the jury for me is out on that a little bit. I like the human touch. I like to be able to, you and I have a chat. We can have that real human interaction. I don't feel like you're artificial intelligence trying to provide me with the right response. How do you think that the automated economy, and including say bots as it relates to customer experience, are going to change things?
Well, they're going to automate transactions in the best ways that they can, and it's just simply that's a matter of what I call iteration, using new technology to do the same things better. But as an experience, I don't know that we're anywhere close to that. In fact, I think that what happens is you get new technology, you get excited, it's the shiny new thing, and you overinvest in this as a means of trying to stay relevant by using the coolest, newest technology. Whereas when you think about the technology and you try to build a better experience based on something someone wants to do or can't do, or something that sucks, can you use technology to deliver a better experience because you're actually setting out to define what that experience should be first and then using technology to bring it to life. So, of course, there will be automation, but for the most part, most companies are looking at AI and chatbots as, well, chatbots specifically as the contact center of social media. So trying to scale these reluctant experiences that, no one ever loves calling a contact center. And so no one's going to love engaging with a chatbot if that's what you're setting out to design. But when we talk about things like artificial intelligence, which is the bigger movement, I'm still seeing artificial intelligence, for example, looking at big data and making recommendations to decision makers about what to do with that data, but we're not changing the questions that we're asking of that data, if that makes sense. So until we start to see how markets are shifting and why, and the human aspects of that, technology is just going to continue to iterate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that companies are going to innovate. And to compete for the future, you need a combination of both.
Let's talk about the reluctant experience with a company and the I love that experience with a company sort of examples. Can you give me an example of a company that you would, absolutely say, I love every experience I have when I engage with that particular company, and here's why?
Well, to be honest, I try to stay out of that conversation because it gives the wrong context of what that company is doing and why it's a great experience. So I will give you an example of why I don't do this. Zappos. Everybody talked about Zappos as having a great customer experience. And then you'll say, well, what about it? Oh, they have the best customer service. Well, what about it? And you kind of get silence because Zappos has done a great job at marketing its great customer service, a great experience. And so you'll get different answers. Sometimes you'll get silence. Sometimes you'll get, I love the free shipping in terms of the return. But customer experience, the reason I want to reset everybody's conversation around this, rather than saying who are the companies that are doing it right, it's saying, what am I not doing? And that not doing is predicated by this question: what does customer experience actually mean? And what it means is that it is the sum of each engagement a customer has with your company in every touch point throughout their journey and life cycle. So that means it's not just any one thing, it's everything. So if Zappos has great customer service because you get to return something for free with zero hassle, that's just one part of the customer experience. The one thing that I would tell you where Zappos is absolutely horrid in terms of their customer experience is the website. Type in shoes, type in a brand, type in a shirt, and you'll get overwhelmed with options that have zero application to you. And so you have to scroll and you have to scroll and scroll and scroll. So that takes away from the experience because the customer expectation now is give me that Uber, give me that Tinder-like interface, know me, apply AI to understand what I buy and who I am and what I'm trying to do. So now with that context, I'll tell you that where I see the best application of this is at Disney World or at Disneyland, where everything about that customer experience, that visitor experience is methodical. It's so scripted. It's well planned. Everything is characterized. The experience is actually architected and designed. It comes to life in every aspect of the buildings, the sidewalks, the trash cans, the mannerisms of people, the costumes, the processes, the infrastructure, the magic bands that are improving all of that stuff, the AI that's starting to go into that, the personalized experiences. And that starts to now look like a movie, which is why next I talk about borrowing from Hollywood in order to design these great customer experiences. Now, I know this is a long answer, but even Disneyland or Disney World breaks down after you leave the park, right? The website's not the best. They over email. They don't necessarily characterize who you are versus other customers. And so there's other aspects of the customer experience that we can start to think like, well, what if we applied the same thinking in the parks to the rest of the customer experience?
It's an excellent point, and that's that the digital gap between the face-to-face interaction that might be going very, very well, and Disneyland is like the pinnacle, I think, of that experience as you just laid out. I think that you're right. A lot of organizations, don't get the other end of it, or the digital version of their business doing the same thing and dialing it in. So how would you walk a company? And obviously that could be an all-day conversation or more, but how, just generally, high points, where would a business owner start down that path in terms of just starting to wrap their head around how they improve their digital customer experience?
A good question, because I think you have to start somewhere. You can't just say, okay, what do we need to do to compete for the future? I mean, it's just too big of a question. It's maybe looking at how are the customers changing and how are we performing against that. I spent the last 2 years when we talk about living in the cave, I was definitely in the cave with Google. We were researching how mobile devices were changing decision making, how people were going through the customer journey differently because of mobile. And we looked at apps, we looked at behaviors, we looked at all kinds of things beyond technology. I don't know if you know this or not, but mobile devices are making us more impatient, more connected, more informed and misinformed at the same time, but it's definitely making us more narcissistic, which all of these things play out into really crazy aspects of how do you engage somebody on a mobile device? Because it's not going to be the same thing that it used to be on the traditional web, right? Suddenly, websites have to be more refined. Content has to be more like tweets. You need more video. You need to understand what the questions people are asking and where they're going. And so the easy answer is what we came up with was micro moments. And I would look at, thinkwithgoogle.com and click on the micro moment section and read all you can about that, because what's happening is that the customer is becoming super counterintuitive to what we think and what we know and how we do it. But in there are the answers of where to start. And I think the thing about micro moments that's so interesting is that it forces you to focus on the sliver of the customer journey specific to mobile so that you can make immediate changes easily. And then over time, more fluidly, because it's not just one thing you'll do. You'll see all of the things you need to do. But more importantly, it starts to teach you that there's a different type of customer than you're willing to accept or acknowledge today. And I think that's the greatest step towards change, is once you shift perspective and see what you don't see, you can start to know what you don't know.
It's interesting you mentioned micro moments, and micro content, is absolutely prolific, as you know, and I think that it has been increasing two things, as you just mentioned: narcissism and also impatience. And so if you've got a company that's slow moving, that doesn't innovate well, the culture is really stagnant, and then you throw this kind of impatient customer at them on some level, there is a real disconnect there, and they're probably a lot of times not even aware of this. And so really digging into the psychology, I know a long time ago when I would present, I would be talking about the fact that this is more about sociology than it is technology. And of course, I think that's really always at the core of what you're talking about here is just understanding that sense of impatience, understanding that sense of entitlement that, hey, I'm getting feedback on my Instagram, and so that makes me feel good. Simon Sinek talks about that impatience and talks about that narcissistic reaction, and that it's almost an addiction in his terms. I think that the connected economy, and I'd like to get your feedback on this, the connected economy has a whole lot of really strong attributes to it, but are we losing a bit of that human sort of depth to it? Or is that going away?
Well, I love I love the question. In 2007, I wrote an article that said that social media is more about sociology than it is technology. And over the years, I've sort of changed that or added to it. Like, for example, social media is about anthropology more than it is technology, or consumerism is more about social science than it is about technology. And it just sort of evolved that saying. And it is to this date, it is something that I can consistently plan on seeing tweeted or cited or turned into a quote or some type of meme every day since then. And there's a growing contingency of people like us that believe just that, because humanity, or I talk about digital Darwinism, which is business changes, technology changes, but so does society. And you're watching it in politics right now. It's just that there's this informed and misinformed but stubborn group of different groups of people that the only way to connect with them, besides technology, but to really break through to them, is to understand them, and that takes social science. And I believe that social science has never been more important in every facet of business, well, and also government. But that's a different expertise. That's a different model. That's something that is truly human-centered, right? And it's difficult for businesses because we're not really, we might say we're customer-centric, but at the end of the day, we're profit-centric, we're shareholder-centric, we're stakeholder-centric. And those things come before doing what's right by people. And then lastly, the psychology of it makes it difficult for any business owner to see the customers being different to them, because we tend to project ourselves onto people. So we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. And that's the hurdle. And one last thing, I just wrote this piece that I'll be publishing soon about the jobs of the future. I was asked by a couple of leading publications, like, hey, Brian, predict the jobs of the future that don't exist today. And it took me all night because I didn't necessarily have this answer in my back pocket. And then once I came up with those job titles, the second question that they had was, what is it going to take to train people for these jobs? And that's what took me another 24 hours to figure out. Was they have to first see that they're their own problem, that the jobs of the future are going to exist because the jobs of today are going to go away in many regards because of what you talked about earlier in terms of automation. But if you ask people around you, hey, how many people think that automation is going to take people's jobs away? Everybody's hands will go up. And if you say, well, do you think automation is going to take your job away? No, because we don't see ourselves as actually that any of this is happening to us. We just see it happening to other people.
That's interesting. I've got a couple of more questions because I know you've got to go, and I really do appreciate your time up to this point. I've got a couple of more questions for you just before we wrap up. What was the one thing that you can remember that you learned about Dr. Shaquille O'Neal when you chatted with him?
The last question I expected. Well, I'll tell you this. He's one of the sweetest, funniest people you will ever meet. And he as being a big star and hero to many that he is, he still actually wants to try to be liked and relevant and helpful, and he goes out of his way to do that. But the other thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is that he's actually a doctor, that he earned his doctorate degree by going back to school, even while he was already successful, as a means of demonstrating how the importance of education. And I think that it's not surprising to me, but it's just in that when you see him for all of his other amazing characteristics, it was wonderful to see that and inspiring at the same time.
It's impressive. I mean, it really is impressive. The business that he's built, the impact he has, and the fact that he viewed education that way, to go back and do that. I just find it very cool. So kudos to you for getting that interview. let's talk, a little bit about analytics. And I know this could go on as well. But when you talk about developing and designing the customer experience, how do you see analytics playing a role in helping companies be better at that?
Well, to be honest, that question is lived and breathed by my colleague Susan Ettlinger, and I will say this: so the analytics, I in my work with Google, we started to focus more on growth analytics, which are a little bit of a different tack than trying to understand performance management as it exists today. So I just presented at a big event of people who are responsible for essentially managing performance management programs. That's managing the website, apps, internally and externally. And analytics, are really good for showing you what is, right? But they're not the best at showing you what isn't. And this is the time I think we have to also look at what else are we not looking at, and what else do we need to implement into the system so that we're managing not just what is happening, but what should also be happening. And so this is why I think, so for example, if you look at micro moments, you will see that a lot of that is not in your system to analyze today. But once you look outside of that, you can aim analytics towards growth. So you manage what is, and then you also manage what should be at the same time. And that takes not only a different perspective, but asking different questions, of which then you can apply data to it.
If the Muppets were business owners, which Muppet would create the best customer experience in their business?
Oh, my goodness. I haven't thought about the Muppets in forever. Wow. I don't know. I think I don't have an answer to that. But if I looked at the Muppets from a customer experience perspective as persona, I would say, Kermit, Fozzie, Miss Piggy, Animal, Gonzo, they would all go through the customer journey differently. And if I had deemed them as my target markets, I would have to understand their behaviors to design a customer experience that was going to be excellent to each, but excellent to all, and build it out that way. So I would put them in my persona camp instead.
I think Miss Piggy would probably be the most inflexible business owner out of all of them. I think, though, once you got her on your side, she'd be all over you, just like she is with Kermit. Brian, thank you so much for being on the Fuse Logic podcast and bearing with me with that question. I like to ask the Muppet question because it gets people thinking outside of their box a lot. So, but thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And hey, if you do come up with a particular Muppet that you really do think would be the best business owner out of them, feel free to tweet me later and we can have that conversation in another way. Brian, keep writing, keep talking, and keep innovating and being brave, because what you do requires bravery. It requires obviously a lot of hard work, and so I appreciate the work you're doing, and I look forward to the next opportunity you and I can be in the same space together physically and say hi and maybe have a glass of wine or something like that.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
That was Brian Solis, Mr. X, prolific writer and author, digital analyst, and certainly a really great guy. I really do appreciate his time today. And, this is one of those conversations where, you could, at least for me, I could sit there and chat with Brian all day long about all angles of business, because not only are we talking about customer experience and employee experience, but we could dive down into technology itself and how micro content like Snapchat, Instagram, and of course, many of you may know, Instagram just adopted the video aspect to their platform. So now you can create videos within that platform, and much like Snapchat. So they're trying to steal a little thunder away from Snapchat as things go forward. And, it's interesting how we see this morphing of the technology platforms trying to compete with each other back and forth and steal audience, I guess. I really like Instagram myself from a micro content perspective, but, a guy like Gary V or Gary Vaynerchuk uses Snapchat all day long, every day. And what he does is he just chronicles his day. Like it's him in his limo. It's him, filming his photographer or videographer, D-Rock, he calls him. So, there are different ways to use these platforms to engage with your audience and impact the customer experience. I think it's fascinating when you get, Brian mentioned an insurance company, and, I have friends in the insurance business, and I was wondering, and I'm going to have to ask, if they ever sit back and think about their customer experience and what that looks like from the very first phone call or the experience on the website and how they're looking at that. So this has been a really fascinating conversation, as expected. And as it, as I've had the good fortune to be able to speak with Brian briefly in the past, I really do appreciate his insights. And I do hope that you will head out to either Amazon or your favorite local bookstore and go and get X, the experience where business meets design. As I said, I've only just started it, but, again, Brian is forcing us to think, and I think that that's what authors should do on some level, for sure. There's no doubt about it. So, one of the things that it's important, I think, for business owners to fixate on is giving ourselves that opportunity to unplug, take a step back, rethink our business, and be at least brave enough to do that. I do come across business owners all the time where they do, just like I was saying earlier, they're dialed in. This is what they do, and boy, the industry is like this or like that. And I don't know that they truly realize that the consumer has changed, as Brian has said. I think in a lot of ways, we are more narcissistic. Simon Sinek, talking about that phone. When you sit at your next meeting, I want you to just pay attention to whether you take your phone and you set it on the desk or the boardroom table in front of you. You might turn it to silent, but do you put it in front of you and on the table? So if you listen to Simon Sinek, he would say the reason why you do that is because you're subliminally sending a message not only to yourself but everybody else in that room, that the phone and what might come in on that phone is potentially more important than the meeting you're in and the people around you. Just have a think, just think back to a moment when we didn't carry our phones around like that. You were forced to talk and interact with individuals. You were forced to have conversations. Hey, how's it going? How are the kids? What's going on with your vehicle, or, whatever it is, but you were forced to engage on a more human level. And I think that if you think about those simple interactions and now we just take it for granted. I was literally in a meeting the other day where there was about 13, 14 people in the room, and every one of us, and me included, had put our phone on the desk in front of us. And it's interesting. And so I brought that up, and then I put my phone in my pocket because I was trying to say that meeting with those folks was way more important than what might come in on my phone. No offense to all of our online audience listening right now, but really, I think we should think about that. Thank you very much for listening, whether it's on your commute to work in the morning, or while you work out, or you're taking a walk outside. Thank you very much for listening and staying in tune with us as we proceed through season 2 here. We've got some great guests lined up, just absolutely fantastic. We're really going to ramp it up here in 2017. We already have, with Ron Peterson kicking us off today, Brian Solis, just another really amazing interview that I just so appreciate. And so I also appreciate you. Be sure to check us out at fusedlogic.com. You can listen to all of our podcasts there. And also you can check us out on Facebook and Twitter and all the usual social platforms. Of course, we are out hanging out there. So say hi. And if you have somebody you think we should be interviewing, a great business mind, entrepreneur, someone who's special in what they do, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. One more thing, I think it's very important for us to recognize those folks down in Mexico at newbeginningsmexico.org. They're struggling. They're trying to create their own business, and their customer experience, I think, is a little different. They try to learn the language of English so that they can sell their wares that they've been making, so that if they can do that, they can feed their children and not have to go to the city dump. So please make sure that you check them out and make a small donation. And as always, I want to thank Thomas Brabeck of Octavo Productions. This guy keeps me really well organized as we record our podcast, and he provides all this really cool original music for the show. So thank you to that, Thomas. I'm your host, Walter Schwabe. You're made to thrive.
Fused logic, analytics, and engagement evolved.